Hello, my darlings. This is Mrs. Welch coming to you from the Cavendish Fletcher Community Library for story time. Today we're going to continue with our book, Pigza Swallowed the Key, and this is Chapter 3, Part 1, Handful. Over the summer, there was a big meeting about me at school. Mom came home very serious and sent me to my room where she read my file. After she read it, she opened my door and sat down on the edge of my bed. She said I should have been kept behind and given extra help, but no teacher wanted to risk getting me for 2 years in a row. I guess I can't blame them, she said. You are a handful at times. I don't get how they think I'm such a pain, I said to her. And I didn't, because most of the time I wasn't even in the classroom. I was in the principal's office, or with the nurse, or I was helping out in the library or cafeteria, or running laps on the playground. It wasn't like I was a pain all day long. Like when it rained, the teachers all asked me to run out to the parking lot and roll up their windows. I didn't hear them complain when I came back dripping wet. Or if a stack of new supplies was dropped off and I was in the office, then I always helped move them into a storeroom and received an awesome kid stamp on my hand. Not a pain in the neck kid stamp. Plus, I was famous for snatching flies right out of the air, killing all the classroom spiders, and making sure the white mice were always in their cage. I'll bet helpful things like that were not written down in my file. I know I'm not perfect, but I didn't think it was fair that they told me one thing and wrote down another. Hearing stuff like that about me makes me sad, I said to Mom. Well, it should, she replied. But this year we can start over. The school wants me to take you down to the doctor and get you fixed up. Then she reached out, grabbed me, and kissed me all over my face, and I had to close my eyelids or else she would have kissed me right on the eyeballs. Mrs. Maxey had also read my file. When I arrived in her class, she assigned me my seat and said that she was going to give me a fair chance to show just how good I could be. Excuse me. And all that first day, she kept glancing at me with that "I've got an eye on you" look. I was used to people keeping an eye on me, especially after last year when a special counselor was called in to follow me everywhere. He gave me tests and kept sending reports home to Grandma, which she called junk mail and threw in the trash. I had taken my special meds at breakfast, and they were working good, so I was mostly sitting still, looking right back into Mrs. Maxey's eyes and shouting out the answers when we did our math drills. Before lunch, my seat felt like any old hard seat, and I felt like any old kid. But after lunch, I felt as if I was sitting on a giant spring, and it was all I could do to keep it from launching me headfirst up into the ceiling. My morning pill was supposed to last all day, but it gave out on me. I gripped the bottom of my chair and held tight, and watched the second hand on the clock sweep around and around. And it wasn't that the important stuff Mrs. Maxey had to say went in one ear and out the other. It was that it just didn't go in at all, but just bounced off. And when the bell rang, I loosened my grip and blasted off for the door. But Mrs. Maxey was waiting for me. "Not so fast, Joey," she said, and snagged the back of my shirt collar as I ran by. "We need to talk." That's when she sat me back down and told me about her rules. I had to stay in my seat, she said. No running, jumping, or kicking. Keep my hands on top of my desk. I wasn't allowed to look over my shoulder. No touching the person in front of me. No fidgeting and no drawing on myself. And I absolutely wasn't allowed to say anything until I raised my hand and was called on. She had all these rules printed out on a little white note card. "Now these are my basic rules," she said to me, and taped them firmly to the upper corner of my desktop. They apply to everyone in the class. I make no exception. So if you work by these rules and keep your mind off your studies, then you and I will not have any problems. Problem was I wasn't listening. She had on bright red nail polish, and I couldn't take my eyes off the way her fingers tapped on my desktop and were leaving tiny half-moon dents in the wood. And the next day, I sure didn't remember things she said, and by lunchtime, my meds had worn off again, and I was spinning around in my chair like it was the Mad Hatter's teacup ride at the church carnival. "Joey," Mrs. Maxey said, "will you come up to my desk, please?" I did. I stood before her and hopped from foot to foot as if I had to pee. "You're losing it, Joey," she whispered, and set one hand on my shoulder to settle me down. "Remember the rules?" "Rules?" I said, kind of lost. "Didn't we have a talk yesterday?" she asked. "I'm a little antsy," I said. "I get this way. I need to do stuff. My grandma used to give me a broom and make me sweep the sidewalk all the way around our block." Mrs. Maxey shook her head back and forth. "Well, we already have a janitor," she said, "but I've got something you can help me with." She gave me a box of used pencils to sharpen. Everyone else was doing some old social studies handout about presidents. When I got to skip it and just sharpen pencils, our class president, Maria Dombrowski, gave me a look. I figured she was jealous because in less than a week, I was already the teacher's pet and I got to do the fun stuff. I just crossed my eyes and kept going. I stuck the first pencil in the sharpener and began to turn the crank. Excuse me. I loved the sound of the wood and lead being ground down. I lowered my nose to just over the sharpener and sniffed the clean smell of wood shavings, which smelled like the inside of my mom's blanket chest, where I used to hide from Grandma and then pop up and scare her bloodless. I just kept turning the crank and pushing in the pencil, and finally I had it ground down to an inch above the eraser. I pulled it out and checked the tip, sharp as a needle. I put it in the box and got another and began to grind it down. When I had finished that, I found a couple of pieces of chalk, and I sharpened those down, so when I stuck the flat end between my upper lip and gum, they hung down like fangs. Then I saw some popsicle sticks on the art cart that were used to make paper puppets. I was sure Mrs. Maxey wasn't looking, so I grabbed one and stuck it in the sharpener. I began to turn the crank, but it didn't turn so well, and then finally it jammed up, and I couldn't get the stick out. I nervously glanced at Mrs. Maxey, and luckily she was busy stapling all the president's heads on a bulletin board. I inked the stick again, but it was stuck real good, and I only ended up with splinters in my hand. I wrapped the bottom of my Pittsburgh Penguins hockey jersey around it and tugged with one hand and turned the crank with the other. The stick came loose, and I stumbled back against an empty desk, and my fangs fell out and rolled across the floor in pieces. Mrs. Maxey looked over at me, and so did everyone else. "Joey," she said, "is there a problem?" The question made me feel jittery. I picked up my fangs and stood real still. "No, Mrs. Maxey, no problem," I said in a small mouse voice. She nodded, then turned her back on me. But Maria kept frowning at me, and then she pulled out a little pad from her desk and wrote down 4 letters. I couldn't see, but figured spelled Joey. As class president, it was Maria's job to make sure everyone had good behavior, or Mrs. Maxey would take minutes off of our recess time. Brown noser, I thought, then forgot all about her. The sharpener had a bunch of holes for different sized pencils, like a regular hole for number 2 pencils, and then when you turned the dial, there was a bigger hole for thicker pencils, and even a hole big enough for one of those giant clown pencils that are about as thick as my finger. Mom had said I needed to cut my long fingernails back because I was scratching myself all up in my sleep. Plus, I thought it'd be cool to grind my nails down to sharp points and look like a vampire. Do you guys see where this is going? I'm seeing where this is going. So I stuck my little finger in and gave it a good turn. In an instant, I jerked it out and started shrieking. Mrs. Maxey spun around and ran towards me. I slipped, I hollered. It was an accident. Let me see that, she said, and grabbed my hand. I held my finger up in the air, and it was only a little scratched up and bloody on the tip, but the nail had been yanked over to one side and was just hanging there like when you peel the shell off a shrimp. Oh. I'm sorry, folks. It doesn't hurt, I said, trying to get my hand away from her and shove it down in my pocket where no one could see it. It's okay. The next thing I knew, Miss Maxey had a wad of tissues around my finger, and she held it tightly with one hand and told me it was going to be all right, and she held my elbow with her other to settle me down, because then I was swinging around and slapping my leg with my free hand as if red ants were biting me all over. It's not good to hurt yourself, she said calmly. I was just playing vampire, I explained. She took me directly to Nurse Holyfield, who said she'd seen worse and not to worry. Other kids had done the same. She fixed me up with a big white bandage around my finger so it looked like a stick with a huge wad of cotton candy on the end. The nail will fall off, she said, but don't worry, you'll grow another. Is there a fingernail fairy, I asked her, because if there is, I'll put it under my pillow and get $1. She smiled at me, glanced up at Mrs. Maxey, and nodded like they both knew something about me I didn't know. People were always giving each other secret looks around me, but I didn't care. I had private thoughts of my own that I didn't share with them. So it made us even. And this has been Story Time for the Cavendish Fletcher Community Library, Chapter 3, Part 1 of Joey Pigza Swallowed the Key. Join us soon for Chapter 3, Part 2. Have a nice day.